Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Data Flowcast. I'm your host, Kenton Danis, and today I'm joined by Devin Stein, who's the founder and CEO at Dosu. Devin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Kenton.
Awesome. We were just speaking before we started recording about the Airflow Summit, which just happened, probably will have been a couple weeks ago by the time that this recording comes out. Devin, were you at the summit?
I was not, unfortunately.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you are in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah, in the
Okay.
Bay Area, I wanted to go, but been busy.
Close by, but yeah, timing
Yeah,
doesn't always work. But yeah, I
exactly.
think it was great. Like I said, I also had to miss it this year, which I was very sad about. But we'll definitely try and make it next year. It's last year was really fun, and I've heard great things about this year as well. So to catch it next time. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. So, for today's podcast, for our listeners, we're going to discuss how Dosu both uses Airflow for their critical data orchestration and also supports the Airflow project, which we always love to hear about. So, Devin, just diving into what Dosu does, your website states that Dosu lets engineers focus on value add work by answering questions, triaging issues, and maintaining documentation for them. Tell me a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So, at a high level, our goal with Dosu is to make it easy for engineering teams to generate, maintain, and disseminate knowledge. And when you think about kind of your work as an engineer, especially as an organization grows, you don't actually spend that much time coding, but you do a lot of what we call engineering knowledge work, which is using your understanding of code, code changes, and like all the conversations going on within the engineering org, whether it's in Slack and Jira on PRs, to answer questions, triage issues, write and update documentation, or review PRs. And these are all the types of tasks that we're trying to help engineers with. And also for some background, I started Dosu in June of 2023. But before that, I was an early engineer at a few different startups. And I'm also an active open source maintainer. As an open source maintainer, a lot of what you're doing is kind of falls in this engineering knowledge work category, where you are the expert about your project. And if you're lucky and your project is successful, then you have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of engineers that depend on you, often asking you questions, reporting bugs, or trying to figure out how to contribute to a code base, or making a PR and trying to understand if they're doing things correctly. And so Dosu, we work heavily with open source, with maintainers, with projects like Airflow to help them do that engineering knowledge work that goes into open source maintenance.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And so you have a product that gets installed within a software base that helps automate some of that work. Is that how it works?
Exactly. Like very concretely within open source, it is, GitHub app to install on an open source project. You configure it within your app, and then Dosu can, depending on the project settings, auto label issues, deduplicate issues and discussions, and then actually respond to issues, trying to help, answer questions, triage bugs, show people how to contribute to the code base. And then we also have kind of a human in the loop mode, which allows, basically, teams can use Toast as like a triage assistant, where it's doing a first pass, gathering related resources to answer any new issue, showing you a preview of what it would have responded, and then you can use that to either publish it, edit it, or create your own response.
Got it. Makes sense. That makes me think back to my first project when I was a data engineer working in consulting, kind of in my past life. I inherited this massive repo with all of this very specific, like business code that was used for analytics. And the person who had created all of it had left already by the time I got there. And I felt like I had absolutely no idea what all of it was. It took forever to just kind of sift through all of it and kind of learn what was going on. I imagine
Exactly.
that this tool would have helped me out a lot.
Yeah, and like the idea like, or hoping to build with those was like, whoever that engineer was, like as they were building that code base, they're kind of generating knowledge, and can Dosu help you kind of structure, organize that, and then maintain that over time for other people in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So your product has some AI in the background to help it out, I understand. And those applications are typically built on a lot of data to make them most useful. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of having a reliable, up-to-date data that feeds your product?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess Dosu is, an AI native company in terms of like, I think the unlock that allows us, I guess to build Dosu is that LLMs help structure kind of unstructured engineering knowledge and information, and then make decisions about how to use that to automate workflows. But at the end of the day, a LLM, product is a data or ML product as well. And like kind of the data that we are ingesting and curating and structuring is integral to the product working. If the data that Dosu is reading from is stale or out of date or incorrect, hasn't been updated, then its responses or its abilities is limited. So data is really at the center of what we do, both in terms of like in the background and then also at inference time, we'll end up seeing as a result of data.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And so where does Airflow fit into that?
Yeah, so that was the, I guess insight that led us to using Airflow was, at the end of the day, like I was saying, any LLM company is just a data company, fundamentally. The whether you're training your own models or using off the shelf models, it's only as good as the information you curate. And in my previous roles, and actually part of the reason I got involved in open source was that my last role, it was a more traditional ML company where we ran a lot of open source projects and used Airflow as our scheduling uh, for our data platform, for all of our scheduled jobs. And I realized, as we were building out Dosu, when we are ingesting data from all these different sources, whether it's GitHub, Slack, Jira, etc. You need to do that at some interval. And what you end up having is something that looks exactly like any data pipeline. So a step for loading data into our environment, a step for transforming that either into embeddings or using LLMs to augment that information or extract important facts from it and then actually writing that to a vector database and storing it. So we use Airflow for the kind of traditional scheduling piece of what we do, the backbone of the product, as well as like other types of scheduled activity that we want to do. So we do periodic reviews of threads to determine if they were resolved and if so, what was the resolution and like what information we can extract from that or, running evaluations on some fixed schedule.
Yeah, interesting. That makes sense. And so you said you just founded Dosu in spring of 2023, so not terribly long ago. So you had, I assume, your choice of kind of any orchestrator you wanted to use when building out your platform. What made you choose Airflow?
I think when starting a company or trying to move as fast as possible, I am an engineer, so I'm always alert. Like, I have a fascination with new and shiny tools. Going back to data reliability being really important for what we do, I had used Airflow heavily in the past. Other engineers at Dosu had used Airflow at scale. So we knew like scale wasn't going to be an issue. We knew how to operate it. And we knew like it would solve our use case very well. So it was just a very good fit for kind of what we were looking for. And we knew it would kind of be both easy to get going with, but also that we could keep it around for the long term.
Yeah. And imagine talking about, institutional knowledge is something that your product helps out with a lot. And that's really important for a lot of engineering teams. That is definitely a benefit of Airflow is so many people know how to use it. It's pretty standard within at least the data engineering space that you're more likely to get people up and running quickly than choosing a more obscure tool, I would assume.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. And any sort of interesting stories that you've come across kind of implementing Airflow for your use case over the last year or so?
I would say that, you know, I don't know if there's any particularly like novel things other than kind of re-emphasizing the point of that a lot of things look similar to what we've done before, uh, in terms of just, more our data pipelines are doing, instead of like, using Spark to do transformation or something like that, like I did in my previous company, we're using LLMs to kind of augment the data. So nothing too novel. I think something interesting maybe that we're looking to explore is using OpenAI's kind of batch endpoints and scheduling jobs that we want to do in the background,
Mm.
that are like, we want to compute some statistics over, tens of thousands of threads or something like that. It's not time sensitive, and using Airflow as like the scheduling mechanism and like for launching all of those jobs on like a platform like OpenAI. So I guess that's something interesting that we've been looking at.
Yeah, cool. I do think it's interesting just overall to hear you speak about, for an AI native company, we hear about this a lot at Astronomer where not everybody thinks of Airflow as kind of their first choice for a tool for, ML ops or kind of AI driven workflows because it's sort of this traditional, like, you know, bread and butter, like people think of it as an ETL scheduler. But as you've described, all of that AI native workflows are just data workflows under the hood, and so there's not actually a lot of difference in terms of what you're doing with Airflow versus if you had a different end product.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm saying most LLM companies today are doing RAG, or retrieval augmented generation.
Mm,
And when you do RAG, you need a data corpus that you have to index and store somewhere, which is ETL. You're like taking data from somewhere, you're doing some transformations on it, you're loading into a vector database, and then you're using it at inference time.
yeah, cool. Well, I understand that in addition to, using Airflow yourselves, you mentioned that you install Dosu and support a lot of open source projects, and you recently began supporting the open source Airflow project. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing for the Airflow project and how that partnership came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, so there's a fun backstory. When I was first starting Dosu, and I was thinking about, starting with open source maintenance as like our initial use case, I actually reached out to the Airflow maintainers because Airflow is just, known to be one of the best run open source projects. Like kind of it's been going for a long time, and I thought there was like a lot of learnings there. So I actually wanted to talk to them more on the user research side, try to understand like, okay, where could LLMs fit in? And then it took a while to get approval by the Apache Software Foundation to actually get the app installed. But then, like you said, a few months ago, we're actually deployed, had got those deployed on Airflow open source. And what we've been helping them with is auto labeling. So, Airflow has thousands, tens of thousands of issues. They've changed labeling schemes over time. And so we've helped, one, just auto label all incoming issues. But then I've also been helping them backfill and standardize historic issues, which helps a lot for just discoverability, analytics. There's like a lot of downstream niceties that come when you have consistent high quality labels. And then what we've been also partnering them with is this kind of accelerated mode, what I was describing at the beginning of the call around using Dosu as basically helping accelerate their triage workflow. So when they're going to meet and review new issues, they can go to Dosu, to our UI, have like an inbox of issues to review, and then you get to see all the research that Dosu did when trying to generate a response and the generated response. So you can see similar issues or discussions, related PRs, relevant code files, documentation. And then from the UI, you can publish Dosu's response, edit it, or kind of create your own. So yeah, we've been working closely with them on that kind of like accelerated triage mode to
Oh,
gently introduce Dosu to the community.
okay, that's awesome. As someone who has spent quite a lot of time looking at airflow issues and PRs, I think that this would be very, very helpful. How do you see that partnership kind of with the community evolving? I mean, has your experience been positive so far?
Yeah, it's been super positive. I think, yeah, a long discussion, but I think like there is this feeling or tension within open source around using AI, whether, you don't want to have kind of like what I always describe as like the stale bot effect, which you have something where, Airflow has been successful because of the vibrancy of its community, and you don't want like AI is not going to replace that. You can't like replace a maintainer with an LLM or an AI agent. But at the same time, uh, LLMs and AI can help communities kind of both maintainers be more effective and help them save times and automate work that is otherwise like very tiring and leads to burnout. And similarly on the community side, like, everyone's had the experience of waiting hours, days, or weeks to get a response on an issue that is blocking you. And so having ways to unblock yourself without always having to depend on maintainers is really important. So yeah, we've been trying to be very thoughtful about how we introduce Dosu to communities because we want to make sure that they don't feel like the maintainers are abandoning them for a bot, but actually like Dosu is part of that community and it's there for a purpose, and everyone benefits from it. So we've been working really closely with the maintainers of Airflow to on things like this kind of accelerated mode as ways to gently introduce Dosu and show that it kind of has like maintainer approval with its responses.
Yeah, I like that framing that it's a tool, not a replacement. I think, again, coming back to that concept of like institutional knowledge, I think that's even more relevant with an open source project because a lot of the people who are contributing are, that's not their job. There are a few people who it is, like we have some folks at Astronomer who it is their job to work on open source Airflow, which is great. But it's certainly not the majority of like the 3,000 committers, or certainly even all of like the PMC members who are leading the project. So, if those folks aren't available because they're doing something else or a different job or anything, then it's helpful to have that extra tool in there to kind of fill in the gaps and keep the continuity.
Exactly.
Well, that's really cool. I'm very interested to hear kind of where that goes over time and to get the feedback from the community. So I always like to end with a standard final question, and that's what would you most like to see from development of the Airflow project in the near future?
That's a good question. So I haven't kept up to date with the Airflow 3. I know there's a lot that was announced last week at Airflow Summit. So some of it may already be in the works. I think the thing that, especially within our space, we use Airflow kind of like the traditional, like the ETL scheduled workloads, but we also have workloads that are a bit more dynamic. And I think, but like are fundamentally like kind of mapped to workflows or like DAGs and tasks in Airflow world. And so I think over time, I would like to see more, flexibility, I guess, on Airflow to manage more dynamic scheduled workflows in like that kind of, yeah, easier and more first class way. I mean, we leverage dynamic DAGs and like existing concepts, but I think kind of pushing towards better of like scheduling and management of like more ad hoc dynamic workloads, I think will be super, super useful.
Interesting. And so when you say dynamic workflows, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean about that? Like which part of it do you want to be dynamic that you feel like isn't well supported in Airflow
Yeah.
today?
So I guess a very like top of mind thing, because we were just talking about, is like we have this we want to have a kind of like an exponential back off type of task
Mm.
where it is
Yeah.
scheduled and then it pulls the information if it hasn't changed, and it updates its schedule to back off basically, and then it checks again, and then that counter then gets reset once it finds that content has changed, and then kind of repeats that process. um and so right now, like, I'm not sure the best way to do that with Airflow or if it's even possible. But it would be nice to have like kind of some sort of like dynamic scheduling of a task like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. There is an exponential back off on the retry function, which I mean, obviously less than ideal to set up a task to like purposely fail and then like wait until it tries again. It's not so much like waiting. The task itself isn't waiting. It's just waiting to retry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind. That is interesting. I mean, I'm sure you could write like a custom function to do that in one DAG and then use a data set just kind of based on that DAG when it finished. Um, but Yeah, okay, I see what you're getting at. That is, a bit of a custom solution to implement
Yeah,
right now
yeah.
within Airflow, so, yeah, that's interesting feedback. I actually haven't heard that one specifically before. Okay, cool. Well, Devin, thanks so much for joining us today. It was great chatting with you. To close out, what's the best way for folks to get in touch with you?
Go to our website, dosu.dev, dosu.dev, or reach out at hi@dosu.dev, or kind of follow us on Twitter.
Okay, that's great. Well, again, we'll be looking out for kind of your impact on the Airflow community and look forward to hearing more about it. So, thanks again for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kenton.